The king who sold his own people to slave traders, a controversial story from African history in the early 1800s, in the forests of what is today Benin. There stood a powerful and feared kingdom known as the Kingdom of Dahomey. This kingdom was famous for its disciplined army, its wealth, and its fierce warriors. Among those warriors was a group that shocked the world. They were an elite army made entirely of women, the legendary Goji, often called the Dahomey Amazons. But behind the strength and power of this kingdom was a story that still sparks debate among historians today. It is the story of King Ghezo, a prince who took the throne before Ghezo became king. Dahomey was ruled by his brother, King Ghezo. However, the kingdom was unstable under his rule. Many chiefs and merchants were unhappy with him. At the same time, European traders along the West African coast were making enormous profits from the transatlantic slave trade. One of the most powerful slave traders operating in the region was a Brazilian merchant named Francisco Felix de Souza. He controlled a major trading post in the coastal city of Ouidah, one of the busiest slave ports in West Africa. According to historical accounts, de Souza helped Prince Ghezo overthrow his brother. In 1818, Ghezo became the new king of Dahomey, but this new alliance came with a price: the business of war and slavery. Once he became king, Ghezo transformed Dahomey into one of the most powerful military states in West Africa. His armies launched raids on neighboring territories. Villages were attacked, and women and children were captured. Some were forced into labor in Dahomey, but many others were sold to European and Brazilian slave traders waiting on the coast. These captives were marched in chains to ports like Ouidah. From there, they were loaded onto ships crossing the Atlantic. Millions of Africans were transported during the Transatlantic Slave Trade. One of the darkest chapters in world history, Dahomey became one of the kingdoms deeply involved in this trade, and King Ghezo became one of its most powerful suppliers. A king of power and contradictions, yet Ghezo's story is more complicated than it first appears. While he profited from the slave trade, he was also a strong ruler who expanded and organized his kingdom. He strengthened Dahomey's army and economy. He developed an elaborate royal court and cultural traditions. And he made the Goji female warriors one of the most feared military forces in Africa. European visitors who came to Dahomey described the kingdom as highly organized, disciplined, and powerful. But by the mid-1800s, the world was beginning to change. European nations, especially United Kingdom, were starting to outlaw the slave trade. British officials pressured African rulers to stop selling enslaved people. They wanted Dahomey to switch to legitimate trade, to selling palm oil instead. The famous words of King Ghezo, but Ghezo resisted these pressures. According to historical reports, he once responded to British demands with a chilling statement. He said the slave trade was the principal glory and source of wealth for his kingdom. To him, slavery was not simply a business, it had become part of Dahomey's economic system and military power. Stopping it would weaken his kingdom, and so the raids continued. The legacy of a controversial king, King Ghezo, ruled Dahomey until his death in 1858. During his reign, Dahomey became stronger, richer, and more feared than ever before. But his legacy remains controversial. Some remember him as a powerful African ruler who defended and strengthened his kingdom. Others remember him as a king who helped fuel one of the greatest human tragedies in history. The truth is that African history, like all history, is complex. The transatlantic slave trade involved European traders, American plantations, and also African rulers who participated in the system. It was a global tragedy with many actors, and understanding it requires confronting difficult truths. Why this story matters. Stories like this remind us that history is rarely simple. It is filled with power, survival, ambition, and moral choices. King Ghezo's story forces us to ask difficult questions about leadership, responsibility, and the price of power. And it reminds us that the history of Africa is deeper, richer, and more complicated than many people realize. Because Africa's past is not just a story of kings and kingdoms. It is a story of people, a story of choices, and a story that must continue to be told. Africa's untold stories deserve to be heard.